If you've been with us for the past couple of weeks, you've been through a series that we called Fight. It was a very practical series of messages. What's happening here? I'm ringing all over the place. That was nuts. These guys are working on it in the back, so we'll figure it out. Anyway, if you've been with us for the past couple of weeks, you know we've been in the series of messages called Fight, and it was a series that was intended to be helping us deal with conflict and helping us handle the conflicts that are in our lives. And it's just inherently a really practical topic because all of us have conflict. And there were a couple weeks where we even dealt with things like if they say this to you, you say this back. You know, we're trying to get really, really practical in it. If you missed any of those series of messages, I would encourage you to go online and check them out. We've got 3 or 4 of them up already, and the other 1 or 2 will come up soon. But I encourage you to go there and check them out because this last series of messages, we've covered, I got the most amazing Connect card comments back from people of any other series of messages that I've done because more and more people apparently are dealing with conflict. And so I was getting comments that were coming back like, man, I'm not in a conflict right now, but there's one just around the corner, and I'm seeing it coming, and so I wanted to make sure I got this principle down. Another person said, this is really challenging to me, and we got to figure out how to live this one out in our lives. And then someone else, this was amazing, the 4th week of the 5-week series, there was a guy who wrote a Connect card, and on the back side he put a prayer request, and his prayer request was, my girlfriend just broke up with me. Oh, yeah, someone's over here being all sympathetic and stuff. Thank you for the compassion. And then the very next week, he wrote a Connect card back, and it said, I put into practice Principle H, and she took me back. I was like, yes! LCC for the win. So I was just like, that's awesome. You know, it's very practical. We just went through a very practical series of messages, but I'm flipping the page because today and next week, we're going to hit a topic that is going to feel far less practical. It's going to feel completely impractical. It's going to be like, where's the thing that I actually do? And there's just a couple things maybe that you can do, but you got to figure it out for yourself. And so, what's the thing I have to actually, how does it get practical? Well, it's not going to feel practical, but I'm going to tell you something. If you grasp what we're talking about today and next week, if it becomes part of how you live, if it becomes something internal to you, it will change your life and cause you to grow far beyond anything else we've talked about all year long or the rest of the year, except for those days when we've said, hey, Jesus came to save you and you need to ask him into your life. Aside from the simple message of the gospel that Jesus came to show us grace and to give us love and to die on the cross for us that we could know our Heavenly Father. Aside from that central key theme of you need to make a commitment to follow Him with your life, this is the most important thing for your own personal spiritual growth that you will ever get. And I'm passionate about it, and it upsets me when people get it wrong. And because of that, I'm going to ask your indulgence. And I'm going to say that today and next week may skew a little to the harsh end of the spectrum. Maybe it won't be challenging to you, but I'm going to look like it's challenging to you. I'm going to get a little bit upset, and I'm going to try to hold myself back a little bit, but you can tell today at the very least there's going to be a moment when I'm going to do a little ranting. And so, because of all that, I just want to let you know I'm not in this to impress you, because there is a principle that we're going to cover today and next week that you will never get from me. I can tell you about it, but you won't get it. The principle I'm going to give you today and next week is something that is entirely on you. So, with all that said, I'm going to say, I believe every problem in Christianity, particularly in North America, stems from one underlying problem. I know some of you have come from other churches. Have you ever been in a church that started a debate about what style of music was the right style of music? Have you ever been there? If you've been there, this problem we're talking about is at the root of that. If you've ever known a Christian who said they were a Christian, went to church every single week, read their Bible, at least they told you they did, every single morning, and yet they're irritating and they're judgmental and they're hypocritical and they're deceitful, this problem is at the root of that. If you've ever been in a church that got all political with different kinds of things and who's getting elected to what position of what authority, this problem is the root of that. If you've ever been in a church where people just for some unknown reason started leaving and the church numbers started dwindling and key positions of leadership were all of a sudden now vacant, this problem is at the root of that. And if you've ever been in a situation where you were outside the walls of a church feeling embarrassed to call yourself a church person because the person you were looking at had had a bad experience with other church people, maybe you yourself are in that category, the other church people that you know who have not been quite so kind and gentle or Jesus-like. If you've ever been in that experience, this problem is at the root of that. There's a problem, especially in North American Christianity, and the simplest way I can put it to you in a way that you might remember is this. Christians are satisfied with a bottle when they should have moved on to a fork. Christians are satisfied with a bottle when they should have moved on to a fork. You have a fork because over these next couple of weeks, I want to encourage you as much as I possibly can to be fork people and not bottle people. To be fork people, not bottle people. In order for me to illustrate this vividly for you, I've got 3 stories I want to share with you. The first story, back in 2006, my family moved to Lafayette so that we could start a church, not because we thought the other churches in Lafayette were doing it poorly, but because we thought that there were so many people here in Lafayette that a new church could reach some of the people who weren't being reached by the other churches. And so we moved to this community with the express intent of reaching out to people who were not connected to other churches, which means the last thing we ever wanted is to have someone from another church say, hey, man, this church just isn't doing it for me. I want to go to a different church. That's the last thing we wanted to do, unless that person was choosing to join us because they wanted to be part of the same mission we were a part of to reach the people who weren't being reached. So when we first moved to town, I tried to make a relationship with as many churches as I could in the area to say, hey, listen, we're not trying to steal your people, but what I would like to do is take a loan. I would like to take a loan of just 1 or 2 people from your congregation. We will keep them for 6 months. We will teach them how to reach the people that aren't being reached by other churches, and then we will give them back to you with interest because they will have been trained a little bit. Just give us a loan of people. And we tried that, and we got no one to join us. And that was like, okay, that's fine. I can go with that because it wasn't our desire to ever reach out to the other people who were already in churches anyway. What we wanted to do is connect with the people who weren't connected to any churches. And my problem was I kept talking to people, and I found out that the people who weren't connected to a church, when they found out that I was doing a church, and it was in my house at the time, they were like, what? Nice to know you. I'm going this way. So there was a little bit of skepticism going on there. And so finally we decided the only thing we can do is to just start a public service. And so we launched a public service about a half a mile down the road, right down that way on 18th Street, Weah Ridge Elementary School. We had our launch service. 150 people showed up there. 10 people set up the joint. 150 people showed up in response to a postcard mailing. And we were all like, oh my. As a result of those people who came, about 10 people over the next year and a half were baptized because they had come to a knowledge of Jesus Christ that changed their life so much they wanted to go public with it. And that was awesome. That was amazing. I personally had the experience of sharing and praying with like 3 or 4 different people, and it was just amazing. The first Sunday we had that meeting, there was a family who had come to that Sunday. And because at the time I was doing I was the treasurer of the church, I was basically everything. So because at that time I was doing that, I saw the check when it came in, and it was clear to me that either this family was ungodly wealthy or they were tithing. Because this check represented roughly what a tithe check would be for an average income in this community. A tithe is a 10% of your income. It's a standard biblical principle that goes in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And so if someone does that, I know they've been around a while. I know they've been around in churches long enough to hear this countercultural message of give God your first 10%. And they've bought into it and they've committed to it. And now they're there. Our very first ever Sunday. That check made up like half of the offering. And I was, who gives to a church on the very first Sunday? It's like, what? I can't trust these people. But they did. And it was clear to me that they were making some type of commitment. And so instantly in my head, I thought, oh my. This is a family that A, seems to be relatively mature spiritually, and B, it's a family that is committed to what we're doing. Praise God. About 3 months later, I get a phone call from this family, and they said to me, you know what? We're going to go back to our former church. And I never really wanted to steal people from other churches anyway, so I was kind of okay with that, but at the same time, I wanted to know why. And the reason they gave me for wanting to go back to their other church was simply this. They said, there are too many baby Christians around here, not enough people like us. And I went, where did we miss that boat? What just happened? How can a person seemingly be around Jesus for so long and not become more like him? Jesus who said, I came to seek and to save the lost. Because heaven's later when we get to hang out with the family. I'm going to seek and to save the lost. That's what Jesus said. And I was wondering, how can a family be that much into the practices of God and yet miss that? I wondered. So, the next story. There's this guy that I was talking to this last year, and we were in a conversation about a whole bunch of different things, and eventually we came down to spiritual background. I found out that this guy was raised in the church. A close relative of his was a pastor in a church, and so around the dinner table, he would regularly be having conversations about God things and Bible things and church things and spirituality. He grew up, he went to a college, a Christian college that requires everyone who graduates to get at least 9 credit hours of Bible education. So I'm thinking, okay, this guy has some strong background. He's got some strong spiritual Christian background. And as we were talking, it came up to the surface that this guy had almost no knowledge of the Old Testament. The whole Old Testament. He didn't really know the difference between Jacob and Joseph. He didn't really know the difference between Noah and Moses. He understood the basics of that, but the overall timeline of the Old Testament, he just didn't have any clue. Who came first, David or Abraham? Didn't really know. And I thought to myself, how can a guy go to college, Christian college, be surrounded by the church his whole life and not know some of these basics of the Old Testament? Third story I want to tell you is a guy that some of you know. His name is Dave Hines. He came to our very first Sunday in the We Are Ridge Elementary School. And at the end of that service, he jumped in and helped us put chairs away. I have photographs of our